I remember that day like it was yesterday, wrapping up the last of the unsold candy. A heavy sigh escaped my lips, feeling as if it carried the weight of the world. Another long, exhausting day of work had finally come to an end. I was only 12 years old, but circumstances had forced me to grow up far too quickly. I had to leave school to help my family, a decision that felt like a knife twisting in my heart every single day. As I packed up my things, a mixture of sadness and resignation swirled in my chest, threatening to overwhelm me. I couldn't help but think, I should be doing homework right now, the thought as bitter as the leftover coffee my dad sometimes drank. Just then, a familiar voice called out to me from the sidewalk, cutting through my gloomy thoughts. It was my best friend, Emily, approaching with an encouraging smile that could light up even the darkest corner of my world. She asked me how my day had been, her voice filled with an attempt to lift my spirits. I managed to force a smile, though it felt as brittle as dried leaves. I told her it was the same as always, I'd sold some candy, but not enough. Those words rang with the harsh reality of my situation, echoing in the space between us. Emily placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture of support that felt like a warm blanket on a cold night. She told me I was the strongest person she knew, her voice filled with genuine admiration. She said she didn't know how I managed to do this every day, and honestly, sometimes I didn't know either. In that moment, I felt safe enough to confide in Emily about my deepest wishes. I told her how I longed to go back to school, to have the luxury of only worrying about homework and play like other kids. If only I had that chance, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Then, gathering my courage, I shared my dream with her. Emily, I said, my voice filled with a yearning so deep it almost hurt, I dream of becoming a doctor someday, to help my dad and others. When I finally got home, I found my father, Ethan, preparing dinner in our small, modest kitchen. Dad was a man of few words, but his love for me showed in every gesture, every worried glance. As he was dishing out our meal, he asked me how my day had been, calling me his sweet pea like he always did. Once again, I forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. I told him it was good and that Emily had come to see me. All the while, I was desperately trying to hide the weight of our daily routine and the exhaustion I felt deep in my bones. Dad observed me silently as I ate, his eyes filled with a sadness that made my heart ache. I knew he had noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the result of too little sleep and too many grueling days selling candy at the intersection. His voice was thick with guilt and sorrow when he told me I shouldn't have to bear such a burden, that I was still just a child. I looked up at him then, our eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. In that silent exchange, I saw all the love, worry, and regret that he carried, as heavy as the boxes of candy I lugged around each day. I remember trying to inject a bit of cheerfulness into our conversation, telling Dad we were doing this for us, reminding him that we were a team. That night, as I was getting ready for bed in my tiny room, I couldn't help but think about my life. I pondered over the daily routine that kept me away from school and pushed my dreams further out of reach. I whispered to myself, someday, things will change, clinging to that hope like a lifeline. The next day, on my way home, I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion. I had sold all my candy that day, a small but significant achievement considering our daily struggle to make ends meet. My eyes were shining as I told Dad that I'd sold everything. When I found Dad in the kitchen, he was trying to hide his persistent cough behind a smile, but I could see right through it. He told me I was becoming quite the saleswoman, his pride evident despite his worry. The money I placed on the table represented more than just a day's work, it was a testament to my dedication and hope. I suggested that we should use some of the money to see a doctor, pointing out his cough that echoed through our small home. But Dad, ever the optimist, brushed off my concerns. He insisted it was just old age, calling me his sweet pea, and saying it was just a cough. He reminded me that we needed every penny, his words both encouraging and heartbreaking. The generosity of Emily and her family, who owned the restaurant in front of the traffic light where I worked, was one of the rare comforts in my days. They often provided me with lunch, not just nutritious, but filled with love. During dinner, I shared with Dad how much Emily's lunches meant to me, expressing my gratitude for their friendship and support. But the same street that offered such kindness also exposed me to daily cruelties. I faced contemptuous looks and comments from people who thought they were better than me. Some ignored me or disdainfully refused my candy, treating me like I was invisible or worse, unworthy of the same consideration they gave others. I confided in Dad about this treatment, the hurt evident in my voice as I spoke. The sadness of being treated this way was clear in every word I uttered.
I listened to Grace with a heavy heart, knowing how cruel the world could be to my little girl. I felt myself growing weaker by the day, though I tried not to show it. It was heartbreaking to see my young daughter working so hard. I advised her, "You're stronger than them, Grace. Don't let their indifference dim your light. What you're doing is beautiful and valuable. Remember that." I was trying to instill in her the resilience to face such adversity. Deep down, I wished I had the power to give her the life she deserved and, above all, to keep her from realizing how sick I truly was. The next day, I, Ethan Brooks, made my way across the square to the entrance restaurant, fighting against my own body with every step. Their restaurant was strategically located in front of the traffic light, where Grace sold candy in the mornings. It was early, and the street was just beginning to buzz with activity. Despite my weakened state, I maintained a firm, determined stride. The cough that ambushed me in quiet moments was the only outward sign of my inner struggle. When I arrived at the restaurant, Emily and her parents, Michael and Chloe, greeted me with warm smiles. They were preparing for another day's work. Michael asked how I was doing while wiping a glass with a cloth. I replied that I was fine, trying to hide any hint of weakness in my voice, and asked how they were. The conversation quickly turned to Grace. With a mixture of gratitude and concern, I asked them to keep an eye on her during the day. I told them knowing they were nearby gave me peace of mind. Emily chimed in, assuring me that Grace was like family to them. She told me not to worry about her meals and that having her there was their pleasure. I tried to insist, pulling out some bills from my pocket. I expressed my gratitude for what they were doing for her and asked them to please accept the money for her meals. Michael placed his hand on my shoulder and gently refused. He told me they were happy to help. Their own financial situation wasn't the best either. The restaurant wasn't doing too well, but with what little they had to spare, they helped feed Grace and kept a watchful eye on her while she worked on the street. Feeling time slipping away, I prepared to leave. I told them I had to get to work, a hint of melancholy in my voice at the necessity of heading to my job while my daughter worked on the street. Chloe assured me with a motherly smile that they'd take care of Grace. I thanked them again and left the restaurant, my thoughts consumed by my daughter as I walked. I found myself hoping for better days ahead for Grace, days when she wouldn't need to sell candy at traffic signals and could chase her dreams. I headed towards the square, a short distance away, which was bustling with an endless stream of people going to work or school. The square offered me a chance to approach a diverse clientele, but it also meant standing for long hours, which was becoming increasingly difficult as my health deteriorated. My cough had become a constant companion, interrupting my attempts to sell candy to passers-by. I consciously put on a smile, trying to be kind to each potential customer despite my growing physical discomfort. "How about some candy to sweeten your day?" I'd say optimistically, though my voice was getting weaker by the hour. By the end of the day, The strain of standing for so long was taking its toll. I felt like every muscle in my body was screaming in protest. My cough had worsened, and the journey home became a real struggle. I knew Grace would worry, so I tried my best to hide the severity of my condition. "It's just tiredness," I told myself, trying to convince my body to believe it too. Due to my weakened state, I got home earlier than usual and ran into Grace, who had just returned from her own work. As I looked at her, I felt a mix of pride and guilt wash over me. My little girl, so strong, so resilient, yet having to bear burdens no child should. I wanted to shield her from the harsh realities of our life, but I also knew she was far too perceptive to be fooled for long. The cough I'd been suppressing all day threatened to break free, and I swallowed hard, determined not to worry her. "How was your day, sweetheart?" I asked, hoping my voice didn't betray the exhaustion and pain I felt. I listened to her recount her day, marveling at her ability to find joy in small things, even amidst our struggles. As she spoke, I couldn't help but think of her mother, my beloved wife, and how she would have handled all of this so much better than I was. The weight of being both mother and father to Grace sometimes felt overwhelming, like trying to carry the world on my shoulders. But looking at Grace's face, seeing the hope and determination in her eyes, I knew I had to keep going, keep fighting, for her sake. She was my world, my reason for pushing through each day, no matter how difficult it became. As we sat down for our modest dinner, I silently prayed for strength. Strength to keep providing for Grace, strength to see her dreams come true, and strength to hold on long enough to see her grow into the amazing woman I knew she would become.
I saw Dad come home that day, looking utterly exhausted and struggling to catch his breath between coughs. It was like watching a once mighty oak tree slowly bending under the weight of a storm. My heart clenched with worry, and I couldn't help but speak up. I told him he was getting worse and that this couldn't go on. Every word I spoke was drenched in concern, like raindrops heavy with impending storm. I saw a flicker of protest in Dad's eyes, as if he wanted to insist he was fine. But his weakness was as clear as day, and he could barely hide it. He tried to reassure me, saying he just needed some rest. But his words rang hollow, and I think we both knew it. I wasn't about to let this slide. Determined to lighten Dad's burden, even if just for one night, I took charge. I told him I'd make dinner and that he should rest. Then I headed to the kitchen, intent on whipping up something nutritious and comforting. As I served our simple meal, lovingly prepared, I decided to broach a topic we rarely discussed: Dad's past as a musician. While setting the plates on the table, I asked him if he missed playing the piano. Dad seemed surprised by my question, pausing for a moment. But I could see a glimmer of nostalgia in his eyes, like a distant star in the night sky. He admitted that he did miss it. He told me that playing the piano had brought him immeasurable joy, an indescribable sense of freedom. But, he reminded me, pianos were expensive instruments, and he hadn't had the chance to play for years. Our conversation seemed to take Dad back to his life before I was born, to the dreams he'd shared with Mom. His voice thick with emotion, he told me they had tried for years to have a child. Many people had told them they were too old to have kids, and for a while, they'd believed it too. But when they finally found out I was coming, it was the greatest joy of their lives. Dad explained that it had been a risky pregnancy, and they'd done everything they could to ensure I'd be born healthy. Then his voice dropped, heavy with old sorrow, as he told me that unfortunately, my mother hadn't survived the birth. He paused, and I could see him fighting against the pain that still came with remembering that day. But then he looked at me with such deep love, it almost took my breath away. He told me that Mom had left behind the best thing, me. I was their dream come true, he said. And despite all the hardships, he wouldn't change a thing about me being here now. Dad's words were like a healing balm on my heart as I listened intently. For the first time, I truly understood the magnitude of my parents' sacrifice. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could see clearly the depth of love that had brought me into this world. As Dad continued, he explained how our family's financial situation had worsened after I was born. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He told me that they'd used up everything they had during the pregnancy to minimize the risks for Mom and me. Then, as if fate hadn't been cruel enough, Dad lost his job, and his health started to deteriorate. The pain in his voice was palpable as he admitted he couldn't work like he used to anymore. Regular jobs had become impossible for him. My heart felt heavy, weighed down by the reality my father was facing. But I was determined not to let him carry this burden alone. I told him I was here, and we'd face this together, just like we always had. I felt a steely resolve settling in my bones. The next morning, as I was getting ready for another day of work, something unexpected caught my eye. There, on a pole, was a colorful poster announcing a local talent contest. I felt my pulse quicken with excitement, like a hummingbird's wings. Without a second thought, I ran back home, clutching the poster in my hand. I burst through the door, shouting that I'd found something unbelievable. I couldn't wait to share this news that might be the key to changing our lives. Dad, noticing my unusual excitement, turned to me with a curious expression. He asked me what had happened to get me so worked up. I could hear the hope in his voice, expecting something good. Barely pausing for breath, I told him about the talent contest nearby. The prize money, I explained, would be enough to help us. I painted a picture of him playing the piano, showing everyone his incredible talent. This was our chance to escape our situation, I insisted. Couldn't he see? This was our opportunity. But Dad's reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. It was a mix of surprise and discomfort. After a long sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he spoke. He called me his darling child, his voice soft with love but tinged with sadness. He explained that the piano held many memories he'd rather leave in the past. Then, his voice shaking slightly, he admitted he wasn't sure he could play like he used to. His words exposed a pain he'd been trying to hide. I felt as if someone had thrown a bucket of cold water over my hopes. But I wasn't ready to give up. I protested, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. I argued that we couldn't just give up without even trying. This could change everything for us, I insisted. Dad's response came with a sad expression that made my heart ache. He told me that sometimes it's better to accept reality than to cling to dreams that might bring more pain than joy. His words were meant with love, but to me, they sounded like a sentence confirming my deepest fears. For a moment, I wondered if he might be right. Maybe we were just destined to merely survive. But a part of me rebelled against this thought. No, I decided, we couldn't just give up. There had to be a way to change our story. All day, as I tried to sell candy, my mind was a whirlpool of emotions. I couldn't stop thinking about how he wouldn't even try. I felt a mix of sadness and anger bubbling up inside me. How could we have hope if we threw away chances like this without even considering them?
I was walking towards the Andersons' restaurant, just like I had done on many mornings before. My intention was to exchange friendly words and ensure Grace would have human interaction and meals during her workday. As I turned the corner, my heart sank like a stone in a still pond. I saw a truck parked in front of the restaurant, with men carrying furniture and kitchen equipment outside. Confusion hit me like a sudden gust of wind, and I felt my pace quicken. I was driven by an urgent need to understand what was happening. I approached Michael, Emily's father, who was overseeing the move with a somber expression. My voice was thick with worry as I asked him what was going on. Michael looked at me, his eyes tired and resigned. He let out a deep sigh that seemed to carry the weight of months of struggle. He explained that they hadn't been able to pay the bills for months. The situation had become unsustainable, and they had to make the difficult decision to close the restaurant. Every word he spoke was laced with pain. In the distance, I saw Grace and Emily sharing a farewell embrace. Both girls were fighting back tears, and my heart ached for them. Their friendship had blossomed in that restaurant. I overheard Grace whispering to Emily that she would miss her every day. Emily's response was a mixture of sadness and hope, promising they would see each other again. I watched this scene with a lump in my throat, understanding the magnitude of this loss. The restaurant had been more than just a place for Grace to eat. It had been a safe haven, a place where she knew someone was always looking out for her. Questions swirled in my mind like leaves in an autumn wind. Who would watch over Grace while she sold candy now? Who would make sure she had food to eat? I felt worry blooming inside me like a dark flower. The comfort of knowing the Andersons were nearby had vanished, leaving me with a sense of vulnerability I hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, determined to increase our income, I decided to spend more time selling candy on the street. I planned to work with Grace in the morning and afternoon, then go to a different location in the evening. This was despite the risks to my health. Grace, worried, urged me to reconsider. She told me it was too much, that I needed rest too. Her face was etched with concern. I tried to maintain an optimistic tone as I assured her I understood. I explained that we had to do what was necessary and that evening sales might be good. I couldn't afford to miss that opportunity. Despite my determination, Grace's worry was palpable, hanging in the air between us like a heavy fog. As the days went by, I could feel fatigue slowly creeping into my bones, like an unwelcome guest overstaying its welcome. The signs of exhaustion were etched on my face, a map of weariness that I couldn't hide. I struggled to maintain my energy, feeling like a car running on fumes. Grace watched me with growing concern, her eyes filled with worry that seemed to deepen with each passing day. She insisted that I looked pale and should stop for the day. Her words were like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, but I stubbornly refused to grasp it. I was focused on pressing on, driven by a desperate need to provide. As night fell, I headed to a different selling spot as planned, though my body protested with every step. The day's labor was beginning to take its toll, weighing on me like a heavy blanket. Suddenly, as I was in the middle of selling candy, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My vision blurred, the world around me spinning like a carnival ride gone wrong. Before I could sit down or call for help, I felt myself falling, the ground rushing up to meet me. I later learned that Grace, who had been worriedly following me, rushed to my side. She called out to me, her voice filled with panic and urgency. When I didn't respond, she cried out for someone to call an ambulance immediately. The paramedics arrived quickly and began administering first aid to me. Grace, trembling and with tears in her eyes, climbed into the ambulance with me. She whispered that everything would be okay, that they would take care of me. As the ambulance sped towards the nearest hospital, she held my hand tightly, as if she could keep me tethered to this world through sheer will. At the hospital, I was immediately seen by a middle-aged doctor with a friendly yet professional demeanor. After performing the necessary procedures, the doctor had a moment of recognition. He looked at me with curiosity and asked if I used to play piano at a bar called Starlight Lounge. Still groggy from my ordeal, I stared at the doctor in surprise. I confirmed that I had indeed played there about 15 years ago, and asked how he knew. I couldn't fathom how this doctor knew about my past. The doctor continued my treatment while smiling softly. He explained that he used to go listen to my performances. In fact, he said, I had inspired him to learn the piano. While he didn't become a professional, piano had become an important hobby for him and his family. Is that so? I asked, my voice a mixture of surprise and nostalgia. It was as if a window to my past had suddenly been thrown open, letting in a warm breeze of memories. I couldn't believe it. To hear that my music had such an impact was truly heartwarming. The conversation stirred up memories of a time when music was a huge part of my life. The doctor continued, sharing that he played piano with his daughters every Friday night. He said it was one of the highlights of their week. His face lit up with pure joy as he shared this slice of his life. As I listened to the doctor's words, I found myself reflecting on my own journey. I thought to myself, I could have continued down that path, but life steered me in a different direction. I remembered the last time Grace had mentioned the piano and how negative my reaction had been. Worry creeping into my voice, I asked about my daughter. The doctor reassured me that she was fine, that a nurse had taken her to get some food. He described Grace as very intelligent, mature for her age, and a wonderful child. Then the doctor changed his tone slightly, broaching a more sensitive topic. He politely asked why Grace needed to sell candy, noting it was quite unusual for a child. I felt a twinge of discomfort at the question, but I could sense the doctor's genuine concern. Sighing, I began to share our story. I explained that life had led us down some difficult paths. After leaving music, we faced several hardships. Grace's mother passed away early, and since then, it had been a struggle to keep everything together. Selling candy was our way of supplementing our income. As I spoke, I felt a mix of sadness and resignation washing over me. The doctor listened attentively, clearly moved by our story. He said he remembered me playing piano at the bar, that I had incredible talent, and my music was touching. His voice filled with emotion as he expressed how moved he was to learn that someone who had such a positive impact on his life had faced so many difficulties. After a moment of silence, the doctor asked, with a sympathetic look, if there was any way he could help. My initial impulse was to decline, saying there was nothing he could do. But in that moment, I set aside my pride and thought of Grace. With a trembling voice that mixed vulnerability and determination, I hesitantly began to explain that there might be something that could change our situation. I told him about a talent contest in the area. The prize money would be more than enough to improve Grace's life, perhaps give us a new beginning. The doctor leaned forward, encouraging me to continue. I confessed that we didn't have money for the entry fee or proper clothes for the performance. And honestly, I was scared. The weakness was evident on my face as I admitted this. I confessed to the doctor that I was afraid of giving Grace false hope. The thought of failing in front of her if I didn't win was terrifying. The doctor's response took me by surprise. He reminded me that I had inspired him with my music years ago, and now it was his turn to help. His voice was filled with unwavering conviction. He offered to cover the entry fee and help find suitable clothing for the performance. He said I had made a significant impact on his life, and this was the least he could do. I stared at the doctor, a mix of gratitude and disbelief in my eyes. I pleaded with him not to mention any of this to Grace. I emphasized the importance of keeping the plan a secret. I didn't want to give her hope until we knew the results. The doctor nodded, understanding the delicate nature of the situation. He promised not to say anything to my daughter. He expressed his desire to help me shine again, suggesting this could be the beginning of a new chapter for both Grace and me. Sensing my excitement, the doctor continued in an encouraging tone. He told me he had seen what music could do and how it could change things. He believed in my potential. He acknowledged that I might feel weak now, but insisted this contest was more than just a competition. It was an opportunity to change my life. He assured me he was there to help with everything I needed. His eyes locked on mine, conveying confidence and support. Although moved by the doctor's words, I still felt a twinge of resistance. I thanked him but expressed my doubts about whether this would work out. The uncertainty was evident in my voice. The doctor understood my concerns, but urged me not to let fear make my decisions. He promised to be by my side, helping me get into top form for the contest. Then he made one request, to send Grace back to school. He insisted she shouldn't continue working on the streets without studying. I was momentarily speechless. While I felt the doctor's request was a bit presumptuous, I couldn't deny the truth in his words. Finally, I admitted he was right. I recognized the value of education for Grace's future. I acknowledged that she deserved more than I could currently provide alone. I even joked that if I was practicing for the contest, I could say I was going to work. The doctor smiled, pleased that I was receptive to the idea. He suggested I consider the financial support until the contest as a way of repaying the positive impact my music had on his life. He invited me to come to his house daily to practice piano. He assured me he would ensure we had everything we needed for this new phase. I felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope, nodding gratefully at the doctor's generosity. I struggled to find words to express my gratitude. I told him this meant so much to me and would undoubtedly change everything for Grace. I promised to do my best not to let this opportunity go to waste, my voice filled with firm determination.
The next morning, Dad called me into the kitchen for a serious talk. My heart skipped a beat, wondering what could be so important. He started by saying my name, his voice sounding firmer than I'd heard in a long time. Then, he dropped a bombshell. He wanted me to go back to school. I stared at him, my young face a mixture of surprise and confusion. The words tumbled out of my mouth before I could stop them. I asked about the money, reminding him that I needed to help by selling candy. It was necessary for our survival, I insisted, each word heavy with worry. Dad sighed, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. He told me he was feeling better now, his voice softer than before. He said he'd continue selling candy while I studied. Then he mentioned Mom, saying that the education she always wanted for me was important to him. I could hear the pain in his voice as he spoke about her, even though he tried to hide it. I hesitated, not wanting to put all the burden on Dad's shoulders. My voice trembled with emotion as I asked if he really thought he could do this alone. I didn't want him to get worse because of me. Dad gathered all his strength to answer. He told me this was something he needed to do, not just for me, but for himself too. He assured me it was okay to focus on my studies. As I looked at him, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, worry, and a glimmer of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. It was like seeing a crack of sunlight through storm clouds. I wanted to believe him, to trust that things could get better, but a part of me was still scared. What if this change was too much for Dad? What if I went back to school only to have to leave again? But looking into his determined eyes, I decided to have faith in him, in us. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new and better for both of us.
I accompanied Grace to school the next day. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with meaning. As I watched her enter the school building, I felt a swell of pride. I told her she was going to do incredible things, and that I was proud of her. Walking back, my heart was a tangle of worry, fear, and hope. I knew I wasn't fully recovered, and that the treatment would demand more than we could currently afford. But at that moment, Grace's future was the priority. When I arrived at Dr. Williams' house, I was greeted with a welcoming smile. He asked if I was ready to begin, and led me to a grand piano that occupied part of the living room. Sitting at the piano, feeling the keys beneath my fingers, was like rediscovering a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever. With each note I played, I felt a mixture of joy and pain. The music transported me to a time when life was simpler, full of promise. Dr. Williams observed me playing and commented on my incredible talent. He said Grace would be very proud of me. Despite his encouraging words, a bitter taste lingered in my mouth. The reality that Grace had never seen me play the piano weighed heavily on my heart. I thought to myself, she doesn't even know if I can play the piano well. Doubt began to eat away at the small confidence I had built. What if I couldn't live up to expectations at the contest? What if all this effort was for nothing? I allowed silence to fill the room for a moment. Then I shared my anxiety with the doctor. Weakly, I admitted that I was scared. I was afraid of failing, of disappointing Grace. Sometimes I thought I should be looking for jobs instead of wasting time here. What if this was all a waste of time? Dr. Williams listened carefully, his eyes filled with clear empathy. He told me he understood my fears, but reminded me that fear shouldn't prevent me from trying. He insisted my music, my playing, was special. He said I had an opportunity to change my life and Grace's life. I wasn't wasting time, he assured me, but investing in my future and hers. As our conversation continued, I expressed my anxiety about what would come after the contest. What if I didn't make it through? What would I do then? My voice was thick with uncertainty. That's when Dr. Williams proposed a solution I hadn't expected. He understood this was troubling me, so he offered to hire me as his driver if I didn't make it through the contest. It would be light work, not too demanding. This alternative emerged as a safety net, but he urged me to give it my all, to strive to achieve my dream. If there was anything he could ask, it was that. Surprised by the doctor's generosity and unconditional support, I felt a wave of gratitude and relief wash over me. I thanked him, telling him his offer meant so much to me. I promised to do my absolute best for Grace's sake. As I spoke, I felt determination growing stronger in my heart.
I remember that quiet afternoon when Dad and I shared a peaceful moment in our tiny kitchen. I was bursting with excitement, eager to tell him about my day at school. My eyes were shining with a vigor that only a child can possess. "Dad, you won't believe it," I exclaimed, gesturing wildly. "We did this amazing science experiment at school today. It was absolutely incredible." I could barely contain my enthusiasm as I told him how the math teacher had praised my talent with numbers. Then I gushed about the art teacher, who I thought was so cool. I described how he showed us paintings that reminded me of the candy we used to sell. As I spoke, I noticed Dad watching me intently. His eyes were filled with a mixture of admiration and emotion that made my heart swell. He told me how wonderful it all sounded and how happy he was that I was enjoying school. I could see his heart warming at my pure joy, like butter melting on warm toast. When he said I had always been so smart and that Mom would be proud, I felt a bittersweet pang in my chest. I smiled, my eyes still sparkling with the memories of the day. "I wish you could see some of the things we're learning, Dad," I said wistfully. "There's so much new stuff. School is like a magical place." As I said those words, I realized how much I had missed learning and how grateful I was for this second chance. It was like I had been living in a black and white world, and suddenly everything was in vibrant color. I wanted to share every detail with Dad, to bring him into this new world I was discovering. But at the same time, I felt a twinge of guilt. Here I was, excited about school, while Dad was working so hard to make it possible. I hoped that my enthusiasm could somehow make up for the sacrifices he was making. In that moment, our little kitchen felt like the warmest, safest place in the world.
The enthusiasm in Grace's voice made me reflect on the opportunities education was opening up for her. Yet, beneath this moment of joy, I felt a growing anxiety gnawing at me. I had been secretly practicing for the talent contest, hoping to change Grace's life, but the weight of not telling her the truth was bearing down on me. I started to say, "Grace, there's something you need to know," but then I hesitated. The fear of creating disappointment if I didn't win the contest held me back from continuing. Instead, I changed the subject, telling her she was right about school being a magical place. I smiled and told her I wanted her to explore all that magic without worrying about anything else. The night before the big day, I met with Dr. Williams to discuss the final details before the talent contest. His office, always a place of tranquility, seemed especially welcoming that afternoon, as if anticipating the possibility of change the next day. Dr. Williams started by saying he had something for me and pulled out an elegantly wrapped suit from his cabinet. He explained he wanted me to have attire befitting a talented musician and that this suit was specially chosen for the occasion. I was touched by the attention to detail, feeling a mix of gratitude and nervousness. "Doctor, this is too much. I don't know how to thank you," I said, admiring the suit with a surprised expression. The doctor smiled, his kindness as much a part of his nature as his medical skills. He wasn't done yet, though. He declared his intention to pick me up in a luxury car the next day, wanting me to arrive at the contest feeling good and special. His voice carried a clear determination as he said I should be treated like the respected musician I was. Still overwhelmed by the doctor's generosity, I tried to decline the offer. I insisted that the contest venue was very close and that I could easily walk there without any problem. For someone used to frugality, such a lavish idea was uncomfortable. But Dr. Williams wouldn't take no for an answer. The doctor told me I shouldn't worry about anything but my performance tomorrow. He said I shouldn't be concerned with walking or public transport. He wanted my sole focus to be on the performance, emphasizing how important it was for me to feel valued and able to concentrate. He placed his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of support, urging me to trust him. On the dawn of the day that might change our lives, I woke to the first light filtering through the curtains. When Grace came into the kitchen, she couldn't suppress a smile at the meticulously set table, a clear sign of special effort. Her face lit up with curiosity and joy as she asked what we were celebrating. I deflected, telling her I just wanted to start the day off right, hiding the true reason behind my efforts. Breakfast was a moment of laughter and light conversation, a welcome respite from the usual routine of worries that surrounded us. After Grace left for school, I faced myself in the mirror. The cold water I splashed on my face served as a wake-up call not just for my body, but for my soul. As I shaved with utmost care, each movement was filled with clear intent. Today, I needed to be the best version of myself. As I put on the suit Dr. Williams had given me, I felt a wave of self-esteem I hadn't experienced in a long time. For a moment, as I adjusted my tie, I allowed myself to dream of success, of the possibility of offering Grace a different future. Before leaving, I paused, closed my eyes, and said a quiet prayer that the day would unfold in line with the hope now filling my chest. Dr. Williams' arrival in the luxury car was the next chapter in this already extraordinary day. I hesitated for a moment on the doorstep, still grappling with the anxiety that clung to me. I tried to protest, saying it really wasn't necessary and that the venue was very close. But the doctor cut me off with a reassuring gesture. He insisted that today I was the star, and stars deserved to arrive in style. He wanted me to think about nothing but my performance, his voice leaving no room for argument. Accepting the doctor's generosity and support, I got into the car. My heart was beating in a rhythm that mixed anxiety and anticipation. As the car started moving, I looked out the window, thinking about Grace.
That morning, I was so wrapped up in my own preparations and anxieties that I completely forgot it was a holiday in Los Angeles. I'd been away from the school routine for so long that I hadn't gotten back into the habit of keeping track of important dates. When I found the school closed, I muttered to myself in frustration, "Oh, right, it's a holiday today." And I was looking forward to science class. Determined not to waste the day, I headed back home, my mind buzzing with the possibilities this free day offered. But a surprise was waiting for me around the corner of our house. I couldn't contain my confusion when I saw Dad, all dressed up, getting into a fancy car I'd never seen before in my life. "Dad, what's going on? Why are you all dressed up? And whose car is that?" I thought, indignant and bewildered. Resolving to get to the bottom of this, I decided to follow the car at a distance. Driven by a need to discover the truth, I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I was shocked when the car stopped not far away, right at the venue where the talent contest was being held. My heart skipped a beat. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. There was my dad, the same man who had vehemently denied any interest in the contest when I had suggested it. Feeling betrayed, I fought the urge to confront him right there and then. Instead, I moved as if guided by some external force, entering the contest venue and seeking refuge in the last row of seats. From there, I could observe without being seen. My mind was still trying to make sense of what was unfolding. From my vantage point, I watched people of all ages taking their seats. The anticipation in the air was as palpable as my own confusion. He lied to me, I thought, each word an echo of my disappointment. Why? Why didn't he tell me the truth? The feeling of being left out of such an important moment in my father's life hurt more than I had expected. Maybe he has his reasons. Or maybe he's just an old liar, I thought, trying to find some justification for Dad's deception even as I was hurting. But at the same time, it showed my childlike nature. Sitting in the audience, I was battling a whirlpool of emotions. My resentment was mixing with a growing anxiety about Dad's performance.
As the performances progressed, I felt my anxiety growing exponentially. Sitting backstage, I was frantically reviewing the notes in my head. Each chord seemed to hold the promise of both triumph and failure. When it was finally my turn to take the stage, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my name being announced. As I walked towards the piano, doubts flooded my mind. Could I really do this? What if I failed in front of everyone? Or worse, what if I disappointed Grace? These questions haunted me, but I knew there was no turning back now. As I sat at the piano, I saw a sea of faces before me. The pressure was almost unbearable, like a weight crushing my chest. When I played the first note, I made a mistake. The off-key sound was painfully obvious, like a sour note in a symphony. No, this can't be happening, I thought, paralyzed by the fear of failure. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to stand up and flee the stage. Shame consumed every fiber of my being, as if I were shrinking under the spotlight. But then, Grace's voice cut through the hushed silence of the auditorium.
"Dad!" Keep going. You can do it.
Grace's voice cut through the auditorium, her unwavering determination and trust in my abilities shaking me to my core. She believed in me, and I couldn't give up now, not in front of her. I felt a new wave of resolve wash over me as I turned back to the piano. The tears in my eyes were no longer from fear, but from determination. I knew I had to do this for Grace. She had never seen me play before, and this was my chance to show her who I truly was. As my hands found the keys again, each note flowed with more confidence. I wove a melody that spoke of our struggles, our hopes, and our love. While playing, I allowed my emotions to guide the music, turning my initial mistake into a powerful part of our story. In my heart, I whispered, "This is for you, Grace. All this effort, all this fear, it's all for you." I poured my heart and soul into every chord. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of complete silence. I had done it, I thought, hardly believing it myself. The applause that followed was sweet approval, not just of my talent, but of the unconditional love I shared with my daughter. In that moment, more than ever before, I felt that true victory wasn't in the audience's recognition, but in overcoming my own fears and giving Grace a reason to be proud. After the intense emotions of my performance, Grace and I anxiously waited for the contest results. The room was thick with anticipation, every participant and spectator hanging on the announcer's next words. When the moment of announcement finally arrived, my heart was beating in erratic rhythm, hope and fear battling within me. The announcer began, her voice amplified by the microphone, saying this was the moment we'd all been waiting for. "Second place goes to Ethan Brooks," she said. Applause erupted throughout the auditorium, loud and warm. But for me, this announcement was a mixture of joy and disappointment. For a brief moment, during the applause after my performance, I had believed I might actually win, that I might be able to change everything.
Meanwhile, I, Grace, sitting in the audience, clapped strongly, feeling proud of my father, though I noticed a faint shadow of sadness in his eyes. "That was wonderful, Dad," I shouted, trying to overcome the disappointment he must have felt.
I looked at her, a trembling smile forming on my lips. My voice was choked with emotion as I thanked her, telling her that this meant everything to me. Despite not winning first place, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I was grateful for having come this far, for finding the courage to face my fears, and above all, for making my daughter proud. Fighting back tears that threatened to spill, I told Grace that music had returned to our lives and that no one could take that away from us. Just then, the announcer made an additional announcement that left both Grace and me slack-jawed. They were calling Dr. Williams to the stage for the closing remarks, introducing him as the representative of the Williams family who sponsored the event annually. I couldn't hide my surprise and confusion as Dr. Williams walked towards the stage. Grace leaned closer to me, her eyes still fixed on the doctor. She asked if that wasn't the doctor who had treated me when I fell ill. I could see the bewilderment written all over her face. She had no idea that I had been visiting Dr. Williams' house to practice the piano. Caught off guard by my daughter's question, I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Yes, Grace. That's Dr. Williams," I replied, my own surprise evident in my voice. My mind was reeling, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Here was the man who had given me a second chance, standing on stage as the sponsor of the very contest that had brought music back into our lives. I felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, awe, and a touch of embarrassment for not having known this about him. As Dr. Williams began to speak, I found myself holding my breath, wondering what other surprises this day might hold. I glanced at Grace, seeing the questions forming in her eyes, and knew that we had a lot to talk about. But for now, all I could do was listen, my heart full of hope for what the future might bring.
I looked back at the stage, my mind racing to connect the dots. With childlike innocence, I asked Dad what Dr. Williams was doing here and if he was hosting the contest. My curiosity was bubbling over like a pot left too long on the stove. After congratulating the winners and the event organizers, Dr. Williams began to speak. His voice was thick with emotion as he told us that this year, they had experienced a participant who deeply touched his heart. He believed this participant had touched all of our hearts too. I felt a shiver of anticipation run down my spine, somehow knowing this was important. Then he addressed my dad directly, saying that Dad probably didn't understand why he was mentioning his name at that moment. But he assured Dad there was a very special reason. I glanced at Dad sitting next to me, his face a mask of confusion as he stared at the stage. He mumbled that he didn't understand, asking what Dr. Williams was talking about. I was just as confused, only able to shrug in response. My attention was completely focused on Dr. Williams, hanging on his every word like it was a lifeline. Dr. Williams continued, explaining that when he realized who Dad was in the hospital, he decided to personally take charge of his case. He said Dad's music had been the source of his passion for art and music. My eyes widened in surprise. I had no idea Dad's music had such an impact on anyone. Dr. Williams even said that without the sound of Dad's piano, this contest might not even exist. I felt a swell of pride for my father, mixed with confusion about this hidden part of his life. Then Dr. Williams said something that made my heart skip a beat. He said that when he saw the opportunity to hear Dad play again, he couldn't simply let it pass by. I realized then that there was so much more to this story, so much more to my dad, than I had ever known. It was like discovering a secret room in a house I thought I knew every inch of.
I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. But I was just playing for my daughter, I whispered, more to myself than to Grace. Grace seemed to be observing me with wide eyes. And it is precisely for your efforts, and for everything you mean to me and my family, that I would like to present you with an award from my own pocket, Dr. Williams announced, causing murmurs of surprise among the audience. You once told me that your daughter had never seen you perform. I wanted to somehow help provide that experience for both of you. I couldn't find the words.
I couldn't contain my excitement and grabbed Dad's arm. My voice was choked with emotion as I asked him if he'd heard that Dr. Williams wanted to give him an award. Dad just nodded, and I saw tears beginning to form in his eyes. As Dr. Williams came down from the stage to personally hand over an envelope with a check, Dad stood up to receive it. His voice was shaking as he thanked Dr. Williams, saying this meant more than he could express. I joined my father, my eyes shining with tears of happiness. I added my own thanks to Dr. Williams for making my dad so happy and for giving me the chance to hear him play. It was the best gift we could have received, I told him. Dr. Williams looked at both of us and gently replied that he should be the one thanking us. He said Dad's music and the love we shared had inspired everyone there. Then, looking directly at me, he continued. He told me his daughters would be very happy to meet me, that they were about my age. He was sure we'd become great friends, he said, adding that they wanted us to be a bigger part of their lives. From that day on, our lives changed in ways we never could have imagined. Dr. Williams' generous award not only allowed Dad to finally get the treatment he needed to recover his health, but also provided funds to secure my bright future. As Dad's health improved, he found a job that gave him dignity. It marked the end of a period of uncertainty and the beginning of a new phase of stability and hope. The true prize, though, was the bond of friendship that formed between our family and Dr. Williams. Our lives became filled with regular get-togethers full of music, laughter, and shared stories. It enriched all of our lives in ways we couldn't have foreseen. In this new reality, Dad found employment that restored his sense of self-worth. It signaled the end of our struggles and the start of an era of prosperity and contentment. Dr. Williams' unexpected support was a precious gift, not just for the financial relief, but for the richness of relationships it brought into our lives. Dad and I knew that whatever the future held, we had each other and a supportive community around us. It was like we'd been living in a black and white world, and suddenly everything burst into vibrant color.
If this story has captivated you, we recommend giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. By doing so, we can continue to share captivating stories with you almost every day. Don't miss out on these other stories now displayed on your screen.